Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the situation in Egypt, where a democratically elected government has been deposed by the army, but where the army itself has not taken over political power. In fact, it has handed over political power to an interim civilian administration, asking them to prepare a roadmap for fresh elections. What is going on in Egypt? Why are Egyptians so impatient with democracy? Will the problem of Egypt or the problems of Egypt go away once a new government assumes power? And what do the developments in Egypt mean for the Arab countries around it? To answer these questions, we have a very distinguished panel of experts with us today. We have Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh, eminent strategic analyst, a formidable diplomat. You became a national celebrity when you headed India's negotiating team at Conference on Disarmament on Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. She was India's ambassador to Egypt between 1992 and 1995. And we have Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, one of the most brilliant foreign secretaries we've had in recent times. He's been India's ambassador to France, Turkey, Russia, and you followed Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh in Cairo, 1995 to 1998. And we have my old friend here, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee. He was India's ambassador to Nepal, helped bring the Maoists into the democratic process. Then he was India's High Commissioner to Britain. And coincidentally, he followed Ambassador Kanwal Sibal in Cairo from 1998 to the year 2000. So we have unbroken chain of 9 years. But let me tell you, this has happened by coincidence. It was not planned. And I only hope that you don't agree on everything, because otherwise this will be the most boring discussion we would have had. So may I begin with you, Ambassador Ghosh. Does the intervention by the army in Egypt mean that Egypt has to now go back to the drawing board, that the democratic transition which began 2 years ago has been written off by the Egyptian people?
I don't think so, and I think that the narrative which is being put forward is at the moment by some people, including in your introduction. The military was treated very well by Morsi. In the controversial constitution, they were given special privileges, no oversight by executive or parliament. They have been warning Morsi about the polarization. The Brotherhood seemed to be in a hurry.
Muslim Brotherhood,
in a hurry to establish their bona fides. We'll come to that later. What they did was, you have millions, not thousands, of people on the streets of all of Egypt, not just Cairo. It's not only Tahrir Square. So 17 million people. What are you going to do? The only institution which was left untouched by Morsi was the military. They called a meeting of representatives. You had the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, you had the Coptic Patriarch, you had Al-Baradei, you had the rebel leader. Muslim Brotherhood was invited, the political party. They refused.
Why should they come? You're deposing the government.
No, the Salafi Al-Nur party was there.
Which is an opposition party.
They were there in this group.
I know.
Who approved the statement of Al-Sisi.
Exactly. Why should Muslim Brotherhood be there? Because you're overthrowing the government of Muslim Brotherhood.
It is not a question of overthrowing. You have got a potential of civil war. Do you just leave it? The only institution which is functioning. They did not take over even for 24 hours, the military. I'm not a pro-military rule person, but I am saying that they handed it over to the civilians straight away. It is the civilians who have been deciding the interim government, and the roadmap was drawn up by that group, not by the military.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this, Ambassador Sibal. The charges against the Morsi government were that it was inept, it was arrogant, it did not understand the need for inclusiveness in Egypt, it could not jumpstart the economy, it could not tackle unemployment, and it could not control prices. But does that make it a legitimate target for deposing by the army?
To my mind, no. I'm a bit surprised that this happened, because nothing was coming out in the international press to suggest that the situation in Egypt had deteriorated so much that there was a risk of military intervention, and that the performance of the Morsi government was so pathetic that there would be no option but public protests to depose him. And it happened suddenly. On the contrary, in fact, Morsi was invited to India. The general impression was that he was a moderate. He was trying to restore Egypt's, in a sense, independent policy, recover the lost ground Egypt had suffered as a result of previous years, and take off the leadership of the Arab world. He reached out to so many countries, etc., etc. He seemed to be doing reasonably well and projecting a moderate, effective image. And then this happened. Now, I think the supporters of Morsi are not wrong in saying that he's been in power only a year or whatever, and no miracles could have taken place in such a short span of time. That no other leader, even if it was from the opposition, would have been able to solve the problems that you have listed just now. And then the problem, of course, is that if you go and have fresh elections and you have a fresh leader, these problems will remain.
Exactly.
And they're not going to be solved so quickly.
Yeah.
And finally, insofar as the military coup aspect is concerned, there's a difference between a military coup and then finding reasons why it might be justifiable. It is a military coup because
a soft coup, perhaps,
the
but a coup
military has
nonetheless.
deposed him.
Yeah.
It is not through an electoral process
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It is a different matter that they've decided to restore the civilian authority, and they've appointed the head of the
It was
Constitutional
never
Court.
taken away.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee. There were reports that before he was deposed by the military, there was a meeting between General Al-Sisi and President Morsi. In that meeting, a 4-hour-long meeting, it's been reported to The Guardian, where President Morsi agreed to the formation of a national government representing all the parties. He agreed to the formation of a neutral committee to change the constitution. He wanted to give a call to the Constitutional Council to speed up the law on parliamentary elections, and to appointing of a new Attorney General. The Attorney General left before the army acted. Now, Morsi had apparently also hinted that he was ready for a referendum on his own presidency. Now, under these circumstances, why did the army still insist on deposing him?
It wasn't the army.
Well, what do you think, Mr. Mukherjee?
Well, I think the fundamental thing to realize is that Egypt today is an extremely polarized society. I mean, that's at the hub, that's the fulcrum on which these current events are being played out. I think the army had already decided before this meeting that they were going to oust Morsi, as they had decided when Mubarak was ousted that they would not play the role of an army that fires on its own people. To change a regime in the Middle East or anywhere, but definitely in the Middle East, you need one of two things. Mm-hmm. Either the dictators rule with the support of the men with the guns, which is the army and the police, and of course supported by the mukhabarat, the intelligence. And so you either have an army that refuses to support the dictator in a time of crisis when the people have risen, or you have a situation like Libya, which is massive external intervention. Yeah. Which is why, for instance, in Syria, neither of these factors being present, the state continues to...
All right. At this point, we need to take a break. We'll be back with this interesting discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the developments in Egypt. Mr. Ghosh, the movement for the ouster of President Morsi began with a group which called itself Tamarod, meaning rebellion in Arabic. Where did this group come from? What are its origins? And how did it suddenly become so powerful?
Before I answer your question, I'd like to take up where Shiv ended his last intervention. Is that the issue is the polarization. And it is not the economic problems that may have been supplementary to bringing the people on the streets and supporting Tamarod. Tamarod was a leftover of the revolution 2 years ago.
Arab Spring.
The Egyptian, I don't like Arab Spring.
Okay.
The Egyptian revolution of 2 years ago, which unseated Mubarak.
Yeah.
Those people rebelled against the continuous actions by Morsi through the constitution, controversial, through the constitutional decree, putting his decisions above judicial scrutiny. This kind of...
But withdrawn later.
whatever. It is the intentions of polarization, the killing of Copts, the killing of Shias, 1% of the population, which has not happened in Egypt. They're a laid-back people, or were. So I think this polarization that Shiv spoke about, and the roots were already there.
Okay. Sybil, if you look at the petition of Tamarod, signed by 17 million to 22 million, the estimate goes, the charges they make could be applied to any government. Let me quote from the petition. It says, because the streets remain insecure, we don't want you. Because the poor still have no place, we don't want you. Because the economy has collapsed and is based on begging for foreign aid, we don't want you. Now, this could apply to several democracies in southern Europe. So does it mean that the army would be justified in deposing the government in Cyprus, in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal?
Well, as I said earlier, that we don't have enough information as to why the polarization reached the levels it has reached. Yes, there have been problems in Egyptian society even earlier, and then the revolution showed 2 years ago what the problems were. Then democratic elections were held, and Morsi won them with over 50% of the votes, and plus the more right-wing extremist group also won 20-25%. So you know what the general feelings of the Egyptian people were with regard to the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now suddenly 17 or 22 million people feel that agenda is totally unacceptable.
So the question is,
So
how do you find out the feelings of the people? Through a democratic process or through the street?
No, therefore I'm mystified as to how this got the amplitude that it did, with people coming out on the streets and asking Morsi to leave, and in a sense inviting the army to intervene, which is totally contrary to the democratic process. And I'm a bit puzzled that the public in Egypt seem to have good feelings towards the armed forces. They think that the armed forces are for the people. It's a very bizarre,
but they've ruled them for 60
situation.
years. So.
Yes, but what I mean is there's a big question mark on the democratic spirit of the Egyptian people.
Exactly.
If they feel that the army is for the people, they're happy that the army has intervened. They've deposed the government, which won, together with the right-wing Islamists, about 70-75% of the vote. So therefore, I think one has to see where the real explanation for this upsurge in Egyptian society
that's the question I want to take
from.
to you, Ambassador Mukherjee. Could the explanation lie in the fact that the opposition political parties have really not institutionalized themselves? They have no proper structures. They don't have any cadre. Yet there are people like Amr Moussa and Al-Baradei who think that the people of Egypt owe it to them to elect them to high office. Muslim Brotherhood, on the other hand, you may not like their ideology, but it has cadre, it has structure, and therefore it wins elections. Now, the question people are raising is that elections makes you legal, but it doesn't give you legitimacy. Now, do you think that's the right question to ask in democracy as we know it?
Not in democracy as we know it. If the world accepted the results of the Egyptian elections as being free and fair, with whatever flaws there were, the world accepted it. And therefore, to my mind, the overthrowing, the ouster of the Morsi government, for whatever reason, for all its failures, even if they were all real, by the army, is a coup. You can call it a soft coup or a hard coup and use any adjectives you like, but it is a coup. It is the overthrowing, the ouster of a government which is legitimate because it won an election by a narrow majority, admittedly, and no amount of justifications about the army moving in to prevent chaos and so on, which is the usual argument always trotted out by the military whenever it stages a coup in any country, is going to change that fact.
Okay, but Madhagod, let me ask you, could the problem also be that the Egyptians don't know what kind of Egypt they want? Do they want a secular, inclusive Egypt? Do they want a moderate Islamic Egypt? It's a question of the nation doesn't have a sort of a broad picture of where it wants to go.
I think they do. I read the Egyptian paper, well, the ones in English, because I don't speak Arabic, the Egyptian papers, and I've been in touch with some old friends of mine from Cairo. They are, as I said, a laid-back people. What they want is a pluralist society. It is a kind of Malish, if you don't fight everything all the time. what was happening here, and I'm surprised that Kamal was surprised at this development, because it's been coming. There have been protests on the streets against the constitution, against the decree, against the attorney general. There have been
So
continuous...
you're saying that Egyptians know where they want to go.
In a vague kind of sense. Do we know where we want to go?
Okay, but we need to
So
take a break now.
That is the issue, is that, yes, they want a pluralist thing. They are not asking for solving the economic problems tomorrow.
Well, they should have voted a pluralist government in power. But we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back with this interesting discussion after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the developments in Egypt. Ambassador Sybil, there are reports that General al-Sisi had a telephone conversation with the US Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel, a couple of days before deposing the Morsi government. And this has allowed the critics of America to suggest that al-Sisi actually got the green signal from America for his coup. Now, why would America want to remove Morsi? Is it because of his positions, Israel, his support for Hamas? What is it? He was at one point called an American man there.
Well, I think in a situation like this, given the extent of relationship that Egypt has with the United States and the amount of military and economic aid that they get from the United States, it would have been prudent on the part of the LCC to have sounded out the Americans about this. Whether he did it directly by speaking to Chuck Hagel, I doubt it, because...
Pentagon has admitted that they had a conversation.
Okay, if they did, I'm a bit surprised, because normally face-to-face things like that have to be avoided. Because if you don't get the right response, then what do? Then you're defying your partner and your biggest friend.
So he couldn't have talked about the coup.
That is one. The other is that the Americans were projecting the change in Egypt as a new version of Islamist democracy, which would provide a solution to the political problems of the Arab world as a whole. They were very strongly in support of the change in Egypt. And now they've been put in a position that all their rhetoric, all their support for Morsi, all their political planning, that if you include the Muslim Brotherhood in the political process, into the electoral process, then you will get what you want in the Arab world, a more representative government. Now those plans have failed miserably. I think America is in a very difficult situation in terms of what has happened in Egypt, and it brings out, I think, not only the contradictions in American policy, but the failure to really understand what's happening on the ground.
Ambassador Mukherjee, Muslim Brotherhood is present not only in Egypt, it's present in several Arab countries, in Libya, Tunisia, Palestine. It may also be a factor tomorrow in Syria, in Jordan. And in several other countries, including countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Now, what signal does it send to Muslim Brotherhood and other countries that, if you follow democratic politics, you get deposed? Might it push them to the extreme? And what do you think Prime Minister Erdogan in Turkey would be looking over his shoulder to see whether his army is going to act against it?
Wherever the Ikhwan al-Muslimin is, if it's not in the government, that the ruling government always looks over its shoulders at the Ikhwan, because
Ikhwan is the Brotherhood.
Is the brother. Ikhwan al-Muslimin is the Islamic Brotherhood, and don't forget, it was born in Egypt under Hassan al-Banna. The philosophy comes from Egypt. Ayman al-Zawahiri is an Egyptian. He is the main strategist of the Al-Qaeda. So it sends two signals. You were asking about the signals, and that's the fundamental basis for political Islam in the Middle East. One, there have always been two streams of thought in the Salafists and the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. One is the ultimate objective being to come to capture the state. One is to intrude into the democratic process and use their greater efficiency, their cadres, their high visibility to win elections through a combination of efficiency as well as intimidation. Okay. The other thing, once that happens and they get deposed like it happened in Egypt, then the other wing, the second signal comes in, which is a deep sense of disappointment and a resort to the second stream of thought, which is capture of the state by violence. If you remember, in Algeria, the Islamists came to power. Yeah. And under Western pressure, they were the ruling government at that time dissolved parliament and refused to let them come and form the government. After which they followed years and years of strife and 150,000 dead.
Okay, so Ambassador Ghosh, do you think that Muslim Brotherhood across Arabia will now move towards extremism?
No.
Or do you think they're already extremists?
No. They are. I agree with Shiv all the way till that violence bit. They gave up strategically the violence as a policy in the 1960s or 70s. They just gave it up. They allow other people to do it. They might instigate others. They are in the, I just want to say 3 places. Turkey, the Erdogan government is very close to the Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah. Because of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Turkey is falling out with Syria, with Assad. They are in the forefront of the rebel movement in Syria. Because they are never in front in a revolution. Others are in front. They will come with the cadres and the ideology to take over.
Okay, so they will not
Now,
become extremists.
In the Gulf,
Yeah.
the Saudis hate them.
Yeah.
94 of them were tried in the UAE recently, and some of them were Egyptians, were found guilty. You look at the responses. The Brotherhood scares the daylights out of the monarchies because they are not talking nationalisms.
Okay. Ambassador, last question to you. We're running out of time. Now, the US hasn't described what has happened in Egypt as a coup. Britain doesn't call it a coup. Saudi Arabia doesn't call it a coup. And you can understand, Jordan doesn't call it a coup. You can understand why. Some of the reasons have come out in this discussion. But look at the Indian reaction. The Indian reaction is sort of celebrating our closeness to Egypt, saying we are closely monitoring the evolving situation. And then we say something as inane as India urges all political forces to abjure violence, exercise restraint, respect democratic principles and the rule of law, and engage in conciliatory dialogue to address present situation. What does it mean? I mean, has the cat got the tongue of world's largest democracy? Why don't we call a spade and say there's a coup, we are against this coup, we may not have liked the previous government? I mean, does diplomacy mean that you just mouth inanities?
Well, I wouldn't like to criticize the statement by our government too much, because I think in this matter we need to be a little prudent. And what we have said is banal stuff, anodyne, and the usual kind of bromides that one says in situations like this, because we don't want to displease any section of the population. Now, if the major partners of Egypt don't want to describe it as a coup, the biggest democracies in the world don't want to describe it as a coup, why should we take upon ourselves to be more royal than the king and start calling it a coup? For what purpose and to what intent? And finally, it would seem that we are, in fact, we were supporters of the Morsi government, we were supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we were supportive of the strategy that was being followed of bringing them into the political process, and it is a big setback to Islamic democracy.
Okay, so it's a reasonable statement.
So therefore, why should we do that? It can be misunderstood also.
Okay, all right. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you for sharing your views on the Egyptian situation with our viewers. Let's see how the situation develops. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another issue. Till then, goodbye.